This episode of the Shroom Boom is about what is going on with psilocybin access in Vancouver. I set out to basically understand what's going on from a psychedelic therapy aspect, what's going on from a retail storefront aspect, where did we start, how did we get here.
10 years ago now, this is 2014, so I started into the field in around 2012. At that time in Vancouver, it was not anything as a practicing physician that was anywhere that I could see in clinical practice. Now, when I go down a street in Vancouver, there's a shroom shop.
Some of the young people that I've worked with, some of them aren't even interested in alcohol because they're aware of the health impacts of using alcohol, especially with the alcohol survey that came out, I think 2 years ago, that was really talking about the health risks. So young people and Gen Z, they're aware. They're so aware. That curiosity around psychedelics and specifically psilocybin is there, and they're wanting information.
In 2015, you'd log on for some psychedelic studies and you'd find a few, articles, internet archived of Terence McKenna, some free lectures, some Dennis McKenna books that were available. And of course you dig and see some Tim Leary stuff, Ram Dass books, Dan Groff. But now it's, first of all, you got this new generation with burgeoning talent like Robin Carhart Harris studying the entropic brain theory. My grandmother can easily find 5 to 20 studies about psilocybin alone, just going through a quick cruise through, and also all these well-reputed journals like the Rolling Stone Journal and Vice and Wired, and they're all reporting on psychedelics.
I don't think I'm going to see all of my ideal drug policies in my lifetime, but I do think we are seeing the beginning of the end of the global war on drugs. And I do think that I will see in my lifetime it's breaking and falling apart within Canada, and a new paradigm coming in, and changes being accepted, and people recognizing the failures and the harms caused by this.
People are doing this. People are seeking this. People are desperate. People are suffering with mental illness without a lot of options accessible in our publicly funded healthcare system other than pharmaceutical treatment.
Dr. Devon Christie is a medical doctor, psychedelic researcher, and therapist. Her academic research includes the potential and the safety considerations of psychedelics within the legal landscape of psilocybin and MDMA.
There's kind of two different spheres that I'm observing. One is kind of the governmental regulation around decriminalizing or not policing or potentially legalizing plant medicines and fungi, versus the more clinical approach and the sort of medical and psychological approach that is really the thrust of my career as a medical doctor and therapist working in psychedelic therapy and psychedelic science. So they're kind of two different conversations. In healthcare, really, we're at a place now where I have done special access program, Health Canada approved psilocybin assisted therapy. And that wasn't even an option back 10 years ago.
Psilocybin history in BC is unique. While the Food and Drug Act outlawed psilocybin in the 70s, those laws dealt with manufactured drugs and not natural substances like the entire mushroom. Many small communities in BC were overrun with mushroom pickers, and in some cases resulting in deaths from incorrect identification. Psilocybin mushrooms were made illegal in 1982 and stayed that way until 2022. When the Special Access Program enabled doctors to apply for psilocybin access on a case-by-case basis for serious or life-threatening illnesses.
The Special Access Program with Health Canada is for drugs that are not yet approved. And what is accessible through that program is pharmaceutical-grade psilocybin, not the fungi, not the whole fruit body of psilocybin-containing mushrooms. So there's still kind of a gap there, and I think much to be done. I don't see psilocybin being off a prescription pad the way cannabis has been. Unless you're talking about microdosing, where psilocybin-containing mushrooms are being used in a low dose, but then you're really considering the psilocybin in that context as something you take on a schedule, on a routine. Of course, not every day, because the receptors become tolerant and you have to have like a washout period. So there's different protocols people do with microdosing, 3 days on, 4 days off, or something like this. But that's much more of a medical model, really, like taking something for a symptom. You know, microdosing psilocybin could be like compared to taking an antidepressant, right, for a symptom of like depressive symptoms. The current medical model centers around pharmaceuticals themselves as the treatment. With psychedelic assisted therapy, the medicine is given on just a few occasions. It's in a context and setting that is really carefully curated with trained people to be there to support. And it's a healing intent. It's not about symptom suppression or management. It's actually about getting deep in to the psyche, into the emotional realm, and helping a person to process their history, integrating that so that they can come out on the other side with ongoing integration support, meeting themselves in their lives very differently. People aren't broken in need of fixing from some expert outside them. People are inherently whole. They've experienced traumas and wounds and adapted the best they can. And the healing that is going to happen when they have nurturing and optimal conditions is something that is inside them.
There is a thriving psychedelic underground in many, many large cities in the world. Some of these underground people are legit shamans that have been practicing from a ceremonial standpoint for a really long time. There's also a lot of abuse that happens. Some of this abuse is clearly intentional, but some of it is just because of a lack of training, knowledge, or simply not being trauma informed. This is one of the reasons why Dr. Devon Christie collaborated with Numinous in Vancouver to create a psychedelic therapist training program.
There's already a power dynamic when someone seeks care or help and someone is in the position of providing it. That's a power dynamic already. You add a psychedelic, it makes it this much bigger, right? It's massive. This is where it's like, okay, we gotta do some training. It's actually a good idea to offer training from a harm reduction approach, knowing that people are doing this in their basement or wherever, their guest room for clients without licensure, without training. And so at Numinous, we actually took all comers, anyone who wanted to take our training. They didn't have to be a licensed professional. But this is happening everywhere, not just at Numinous. There are many other training programs, you know, California Institute for Integral Studies, there's Fluence, there's ATMA in Canada, there's the Integrative Psychiatry Institute. I teach with IPI as well. I could name more, but there's many different trainings that people can go and pay money and do. The interesting thing is there's no regulatory guidelines or frameworks yet from licensing bodies about what training is a requirement for doing this. Health Canada is approving psilocybin and MDMA right now through special access, but they're just approving the drug. They don't know about the qualifications of the therapists that are required. They're not regulating that, but because these things aren't even approved yet, right? So aside from ketamine, but if you look at ketamine as an example, there's not much being done by, you know, in Canada, College of Physicians and Surgeons with respect to regulating any kind of therapeutic combination treatment. There's a lot of regulations on ketamine, but not really specifically in a psychedelic assisted therapy model.
I spent most of my time in the psychedelic advocacy and fundraising space for psychedelic research. And then I began to hear stories through Roots to Thrive, through TheraSil, that a lot of people who could really benefit were outside of the studies as well. There's a lot of people diagnosed with PTSD and undiagnosed, and there's a lot of people that need this healing and that are treatment resistant to antidepressants. Not surprised. So I found out that through these individual stories, I don't actually want to be funding psychedelic research anymore. I want to be funding psychedelic therapy. We know this works. let's say that. And then now we need to make sure that that individuals are getting this medicine.
Mia has over a decade of experience fundraising, marketing, investing in and consulting with psychedelic brands. She has built a lot of psychedelic community within Vancouver. She founded psychedelic salons, and prior to that, she founded the UBC Psychedelic Society.
The UBC Psychedelic Society was really born out of a desire to not only network with other students that were also curious about psychedelics, which I was slowly unearthing in this hero's journey, veering into the unknown type of way, but also to learn more from people who were researchers, who were underground therapists, get them in a room talking with shamans, with the RCMP, and that seemed really cool. There's a lot of psychedelic community in Vancouver, a lot of people interested, young people especially, so whether you're going to school at UBC, whether you're out of school and you're a young adult trying to find your way, there's a lot of communities that have a lot of options in person and online.
One of the largest events being the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, which has been bringing together world-renowned leaders within psychedelics and consciousness for the past 12 years at UBC.
The Spirit Plant Medicine Conference is awesome. Huge community gathering. Everyone comes together. You see the international people that come out. They fly out indigenous healers from South America, Central America. So really cool indigenous emphasis at the conference. You get a sense that these people are out here to help. You see lots of light in people's eyes, you see lots of smiles, it's very welcoming, it's very friendly. The talks are very interesting. I've had the pleasure of being able to booth there with Maps Canada, and even just chatting with the people in the booth next to us. There's beautiful art that's for sale too, that you get to experience. And it's like a central hub for the broader psychedelic community through all of BC and the Pacific Northwest and the Americas to come together.
Luke is a YouTube committee lead and has been volunteering with Maps Canada for over 2 years to help them with content creation and video production.
Maps Canada is a nonprofit in the psychedelic space in Canada, and our mission is to support equitable access to psychedelic medicines for all Canadians. And what that means is we do research, we do community, we do education. We're very active in speaking with the provinces, including British Columbia, of course, and the federal government in pushing changes in regulation for psychedelics. There's a lot of interesting figures in the psychedelic space, from the super, let's say airy, maybe less grounded. It can sometimes be hard to find the language to describe your experiences. And some talks were kind of like, I don't know what he's talking about. A lot of this language is going over my head. I don't know what's happening. All the way to the more scientific stuff that's very interesting. We're looking at the concrete research, but the intersection of the research as well as the more spiritual approach concerning people's affective experience, that's extremely valuable, and you get both of those at the conference.
Most of the people that I've ever met, I have never met a person that has accessed psilocybin legally through psychedelic therapy. Most of them tried it in house parties, music festivals, a basement watching nature television, camping through underground ceremonies for sure. And there is not enough education available. It's happening. People are consuming psilocybin. And it is easier, in my opinion, to actually order magic mushrooms online and have them being shipped to your house than it is to consume real education about how to have a safe experience.
When it comes to harm reduction, it's really reducing stigma is number one for me. Whether it's external stigma or internal stigma, just allowing for those conversations. Folks are using substances, young people are using psilocybin and other psychedelics. I think creating those conversations, being real with where we are.
Kiah works for the Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy and is a project manager at Get Sensible, a youth-led campaign funded by Health Canada.
The Canadian government made promises during cannabis legalization to allocate a certain amount of money towards drug education for young people with a particular focus on cannabis and reducing the harms. We recognize that cannabis isn't the only substance that young people are using, and they're also not using it in a silo. So polysubstance use, which is using multiple substances at the same time, is a reality, and it is oftentimes the most common way that young people are using substances, whether it be nicotine with cannabis or alcohol with psilocybin. Like, we're seeing polysubstance use. That's where it gets sensible. We've started to branch out towards education around other substances, really focusing on psychedelics and stimulants. But it is difficult because trying to receive funding through funding bodies like Health Canada or other public health agencies, they're just not there yet. How can you fund a project on substances that are currently illegal and for young people? Like, it's like that double sort of taboo where, like, if you're talking about substances with young people, people already don't want to go there. Get Sensible and the Cannabis Mental Health Project definitely have a cannabis focused lens, just due to the current climate and acceptance of where youth substance use is at in Canada. But I will say, like, the harm reduction methods that we instill and encourage and Get Sensible, so start low and go slow, set and setting, so making sure that, you know, your physical space is comfortable as well as your mental space is comfortable.
There's so many people doing so many incredible things in Vancouver when it comes to psilocybin. Unfortunately, not a lot of them could talk to me on camera because it is illegal.
We got raided last year. We're the only mushroom dispensary in the city that's had any problems like that. I am the most prominent spokesperson for this kind of a shop, right? The vast majority of other shop owners are not doing interviews and documentaries and appearing in the news and putting their face out there, for better or for worse.
The medicinal mushroom dispensary now has 3 locations and is dedicated to ending the drug prohibition and providing a safe supply of psychedelics to the community. The dispensary was founded in 2019 by Dana Larsen and is heavily driven by education and harm reduction.
We get asked all the time, how do you do this? How do you get away with this? I can't believe, like, is it legal, or do you have a permit, or what's happening? And it is illegal, you know, and it is surprising. But it's the same, to me, it's the very same situation as we had with cannabis dispensaries. And anybody who's been around a while or remembers what it was like pre-legalization in Canada. There was hundreds and hundreds of shops out there selling cannabis pre-legalization. We just got granted a business license recently. A subcommittee of Vancouver City Council decided to go against the chief license inspector, who wanted to take away the license for one of our locations, claiming that we had done gross misconduct by the things we were selling. And we had a very good draw of 3 city councillors out of the 10 on council to have our hearing, and 2 of those 3 voted for us to be granted our license and to keep it, which was very important. But the way it was structured, we're the only one with that license, and it didn't create an opening for others to apply yet, right? It doesn't create a precedent like that. I want this to open the door for everyone who operates responsibly and who follows the rules and tries to run this business in a proper way can get a permit. It'll be challenging, but either way, I hope that over the coming months and years that we see a proliferation of not only mushroom shops, but psychedelic shops and other safe supply projects as well, here in Vancouver and across Canada.
The mushroom dispensary and the medicinal cannabis dispensary funds free drug testing in Vancouver at a time in which fentanyl is a massive issue within our community.
Every day, people are dying, people are being hurt, and it's not in the overdose and drug poisoning deaths, but there's also, you know, the war on drugs is a very real war that involves militaries and bullets and soldiers and people being killed, you know, from Afghanistan across South America and Haiti right now, what's happening there. It's not entirely because of drug war, but it's a huge part of what's happening in Haiti now is because of their role as a transit country and a poor country with a lot of money going through because of drug prohibition, which creates instability. In 2019, I was looking around and thinking what I could do to help reduce the number of deaths and the problems caused by prohibition here in Vancouver and British Columbia, and I decided to use our cannabis dispensary revenues to purchase an FTIR machine. And this is a kind of a mass spectrometer. It's just the size of a bread box, but these things cost about $60,000 each, and just takes about 10 minutes to do a test. And I thought, well, this is something we can do and maybe offer some limited drug testing services. And you know, now it's 5 years later and we're the busiest free drug analysis center in the world. We're doing around 100 tests a day, which is more than I expected and didn't really think it was going to become such a big thing, right? The amount of drug testing the province done is substantial. But compared to where it should be, it's a drop in the bucket. And our service is doing about 2/3 of all drug analysis in BC is being done by us. And of course, we get no funding from the government. No elected official has ever come by our location to visit us or talk about what we're doing.
Substance use is, sometimes it can be a public health issue, other times it can be a human rights issue, but it should not be a criminal legal issue. And so when we're creating policies that could further harm young people, I'm talking in terms of like physical health, yes, but also in terms of the legal system and like really reducing the amount of interactions that young people are having with the legal system. In terms of bringing young people into the conversation, it's just the reality that we're at. Like, we need to have the conversations with young people in order to ensure that the policies that we're creating aren't further harming them. When we really look at what the point of policy is in Canada or in any state, it's to hopefully serve the populations living within that country. And when we're talking in terms of drug policy, we have seen historically that drug policies have negatively impacted marginalized communities, so Black, Indigenous people of color, poor folks, queer people, young people. And so when we're being realistic with our current drug policy, we need young people and other marginalized groups to be a part of that conversation. For decades, young people just have not been in the room.
It's really, really important to me and to so many people that psilocybin is going to be accessible by our most vulnerable populations, the ones that we've harmed the most through colonization. All Indigenous need to have access to psilocybin, need to have access to psychedelic therapy. And that's a really hard thing to implement when in our current system most of us can't even afford therapy. Therapy is so expensive. And so if we're pairing psychedelics with a therapist, and that's the only way that you can access it, how do we make sure that it's not just for the rich people?
Psychedelics are not a panacea, and I'm sorry, themselves are not going to save the world. There are so many other public health initiatives that need to happen even before this. I mean, they can happen in parallel. Psychotherapy isn't accessible, just basic psychotherapy as a healthcare benefit. It's those broader things that I think we need access to now. Access to universal psychotherapy, access to mindfulness, access to even recreation, to feel a sense of community, to exercise, to join in. And we're very disconnected in our society. We need initiatives that are funded, that are public health initiatives to help people connect with each other, feel seen, heard, and supported, not isolated, and to build the skills. There's so many skill sets that we don't have integrated into what is provided to people to navigate life, that people that struggle likely didn't get as they were growing up in their families of origin, that are foundational. So those need to happen. And yes, psychedelic assisted therapy is going to be a really helpful and promising resource, but it's like both, right? Both are needed.
There's something happening in Kentucky right now where Kentucky is trying to spend, I think, millions at least on a program to get Iboga, which has been known to be very effective as a psychedelic to help people wean off of heroin addiction, which is plaguing Kentucky actually, which I did not know of. And I thought, that sounds cool. Okay. So I shared that and I was happy about that. But there's a lot of people in Kentucky who actually work in heroin treatment centers and rehabs, and they're saying, you know what? We actually need people to have housing. We need funding to be allowed for people to find jobs, people to, have safe communities and networks where they get out of that cycle. I just feel as though with psychedelics being legalized, if we just get all gung-ho about it and we don't look at the grays and we don't look at the nuance, we risk being ignorant.
I hope that people will join this battle and that people will recognize how important this is, and that it's not just about, cannabis or psychedelics. It's really about freedom and about a better, healthier planet. And it's about so many other important issues.
It's become culturally normal to be disconnected, to be operating from here, in the mind, in the world. And when we're operating from here and we can't feel here, we can make decisions and do things that hurt ourselves, that hurt others, that hurt the planet. I firmly believe that a path towards greater healing, collective healing, is actually a path of coming back into ourselves and being supported to navigate through the pain and trauma held in our bodies that we've wisely disconnected from. And I think psychedelics are part of that, because psychedelics can temporarily open up access to different states of being, including deep cathartic feeling, including experiencing our embodied self, because it's a powerful tool, psychedelic therapy, to help people come back in and down into themselves and heal here. Like, this is where healing happens. So that's the larger thing, and that's my larger mission, actually, beyond psychedelics, is actually for us to re-inhabit ourselves and then to be in authentic relationship with each other as we forge a future together and for all the generations to come.